Hello, I'm Mark Rosekind. That's spelled Mark with a K, Rosekind, Rosekind, and I'm a board member with the National Transportation Safety Board. Our first investigator arrived here at about 9:30 this morning for us to investigate the crash that occurred in Orland, California, between a FedEx truck tractor with two semi-trailers and a motor coach that had a group of LA-based high school students and chaperones. Before I go any further, on behalf of the NTSB and all of the men and women at the NTSB, we want to extend our deepest condolences to the family and friends of those who lost their lives and were injured in this tragic crash. The NTSB is an independent federal agency. We are charged by Congress to investigate all U.S. civil aviation accidents, as well as major significant accidents in other modes, including rail, highway, marine, and pipeline. Our job is not just to determine the probable cause, but to issue safety recommendations so these type of accidents are prevented in the future. We arrived at 9:30 this morning, so we have really very little new factual information. What I can tell you is that we know on April 10th, 2014, at about 5:40 p.m., in Orland, California, a FedEx truck tractor with two semi-trailers was southbound on I-5. It left the southbound lanes and crossed what is about a 60-foot median. It then struck a motor coach that was traveling northbound on I-5. The impact stopped the forward motion of the motor coach, and then both vehicles were redirected easterly off the highway. A post-crash fire ensued, and we can tell you the motor coach was carrying an LA-based high school student and chaperone group, and they were on their way traveling to Humboldt State. There's been a lot of discussion about the fact that this motor coach was part of a convoy of 3 buses. Those other buses actually had already arrived at Humboldt State. There are a number of fatalities and injuries that occurred in this crash. The NTSB does not determine the cause or manner of fatalities or injuries. And so to get more information about this, let me direct you to information related to fatalities should be obtained from the Chief Deputy Coroner of Glenn County. That would be Mr. Richard Warren, W-A-R-R-E-N. For information about injuries, you would obtain that from the Humboldt State Police Chief, Lynn Soderberg. That's S-O-D-E-R-B-E-R-G. And family assistance and support is being provided by the American Red Cross. The NTSB has a GO team here investigating this accident. The investigator in charge is Mr. Robert Aceta. He has over 22 years of investigatory experience, and his teams will be examining 6 different areas. They include highway features and design, human performance, the 2 motor carriers, survival factors, the vehicle, and fire safety. In addition to the investigators that are here on scene, we also have family assistance specialists that come from our Transportation Disaster Assistance Group. They are here to provide support to the family members. We also have a group from Public Affairs from the NTSB as well. The NTSB mission is to determine why this crash happened. It is not just about the what, but the why. That why allows us to issue safety recommendations to prevent these kinds of crashes from happening in the future. Now, over the coming days, our investigators are going to focus on gathering factual information. They are especially focused on perishable kinds of information. That can literally be hardware, but also things like witness reports and memories. So we're after the perishable information that's really only going to be available while we're here on scene. It's really important for us to acknowledge that while on scene, we will not be determining a probable cause or speculating about the probable cause of this accident. At this point, we're estimating that our investigators will be here from 1 to 2 weeks collecting that factual information. If at any time during our investigation we find something that needs to be addressed immediately, we will issue urgent safety recommendations. This is something that it's just really important to understand about our process. We're very thorough. It takes some time. People are often wondering, gee, if you find something, what happens? Well, we would issue urgent safety recommendations if we find something that needs to be addressed immediately. Now, we would appreciate hearing from anyone who witnessed something that would be helpful. We say thank you to anyone who's already submitted a report to the police. Those of you that have not spoken to the police or to us, we'd appreciate you calling the police, submitting a witness report, have them forwarded to us, or you can email us directly. And that address is witness@ntsb.gov. So anybody who saw something that they think could contribute to us understanding what happened in this crash, please get a hold of us at witness@ntsb.gov. Now, we've just arrived. Obviously, we don't have a lot of factual information. It's very, very early in the investigation. We're going to keep all of you informed about what's going on. I do want to make sure that I thank all of the first responders for all of their efforts from yesterday through today. If you want to follow when the next press briefing is going to be, there will be an organizational meeting this evening, bringing together certain parties that will be helping to collect the factual information. And so we will be having ongoing press briefings. To learn about those, you can follow us at ntsb.gov, our Twitter handle, which is @ntsb, now Facebook, or our public affairs officer here, Keith Holloway. Now, I'm going to take a few questions. It would be very helpful if you could give us your name and affiliation.
Mr. Rosekind, Steve Gregory, KFI Los Angeles. Is it standard protocol at this point to put any kind of in-cab systems that track speed and like for logging and things of that nature? I know some fleets put cameras in cabs. Is FedEx one of those companies that you know of that participates in that kind of a program?
So the question is, what about different kinds of technology that might monitor the vehicle or potentially the driver? And is FedEx a company that participates in that kind of data collection? So one thing I can say is that the NTSB has a variety of recommendations on all of that kind of technology, both for the vehicle and both externally forward-looking cameras as well as inward-making cameras. Now, the extent to which FedEx does that is part of what we'll be gathering, because we're interested not just in whether they collect it or not, but is there any data?
What about for the tour bus?
So the question is, what about for the tour bus? We'll be looking there as well. So what you're describing is the kind of perishable data that we're looking for right now. As many of you probably have seen pictures, the FedEx truck, because of the post-crash fire, there's not much of anything left. We will be looking for an electronic control module that might exist. For example, in the bus, we have to look for that. That module could give us information about speed, RPM, hard braking. At this point, we don't know if it's there and what kind of data it might have. That's the sort of information we would get from the technology and then send that back to our lab in Washington, D.C. Because in fact, even if they're damaged, we often can collect that information off those devices.
Thank you.
I'm Tom Wade with CBS Los Angeles. I'm wondering, is there any indication at this point, preliminary, why the driver of the FedEx truck crossed the median? Is there any information that your agency has gleaned from the initial part of this investigation?
So the question is there any preliminary information about why the driver crossed this median? It's too early for us to determine any of that. And frankly, while we're here, we're just collecting the factual information. In fact, why that's helpful is, let me just describe, our process is first collect the factual information, and then there's an extremely thorough and lengthy analysis of that information. Finally, when it's together, a draft report is presented to the board of the NTSB, and that's where it's determined what the findings, the probable cause, and the safety recommendations that are issued at that time. And so while we're on site, we're not going to give you a probable cause or speculate about that.
Mr. Rosekind, Patrick Calif from NBC4 in Los Angeles. Did any of the members of the team go to the site today? And if so, what were you observing? What were you looking for?
So we had our first investigator on scene at about 9:30 this morning. The rest of the team got here at about 1:30 or so this afternoon. One of the challenges for us, there are 5.1 million crashes on the roadways every year. So by the time we get here, you would think, and of course what happens is people are mostly urgently trying to get the highway cleared off. And so thankfully when our investigator was here at 9:30, there was a chance to get the scene, interact with the California Highway Patrol, other first responders. By the time a lot of the team came from Washington, most of that was cleared away. Okay, so yes, our folks are already there doing the classic things you would do, looking at weather, site, etc. Those are just the initial pieces. Let me highlight that the really most lengthy part of this is our examination of the human, the machine, and the environment. So we're going to be looking at a lot of factors related to the human. That's everything from training to their medical conditions, their work rest schedule over at least the last 72 hours. We're going to be looking at the machine, that's the vehicle. When were the last inspections? What kind of maintenance was there? Again, things about what technology, was there an electronic control module that we could look at, et cetera. And then the environment. That's not just the weather. That's going to be things like anything related to the design of the freeway and what that could actually. So there was a barrier there. One of the things that we have already discovered is being over 50 feet, we know that having any barrier, besides just having the median there, is optional. So one of the questions that we would look at is, should there have been a barrier there that could have prevented this? Well, it's over 50 feet, that would have been optional. So again, the environment of this is for us to look at what decisions were made to leave the median in the current state that it is.
Christina Rendon, KTVO in Oakland. You said you're looking for people to come forward with information. How many witness statements have you collected already? And is it not, and obviously it's not enough to build your case. How many people have you found?
So the question is about witness statements and how many we have at this point. That's something we're still garnering. So frankly, one of the challenges we have, it's not like people see the accident and then all call one number. So one of the challenges we have is some people are calling California Highway Patrol, other people are in contact with Humboldt State, so we're still gathering that number ourselves. I think the point is that if you're out there watching this and you haven't called yet but saw something, we want to hear from you. That could be extremely informative for us.
Bennett Miracle with the Associated Press.
We'll go here and then there. Yes, sir.
In 2007, the NTSB issued a recommendation to evaluate the need for regulations relating to fire suppression systems on motor coaches. What's happened since then, and does the NTSB still think it's a priority or a worry that there's not enough fire suppression systems on motor coaches?
So the question has to do with previous recommendations the NTSB has made related to fire suppression on motor coaches. And this is actually a great question because the NTSB has a most wanted list. It's our top 10. Our top 10 transportation safety issues that's going to save lives and prevent injuries. Fire safety is on that list. That is a concern across all modes, but in highway, it's all about things like motor coaches, wheel well fires, engine fires, and so we have recommendations that have specifically focused on detection, suppression, and the materials and design of those systems. So this is one of those instances where we will be looking at our open recommendations. Is there anything we've issued that could have made a difference here? And then are there new recommendations we might want to issue to address any gaps that are out there? Yes, sir.
Patrick Walker, KXTV Sacramento. We've had some video now we've seen of a third, a white car that was towed from the scene. Any idea as to what involvement it may have had, or if any relation to that, any confirmation on that?
So the question is about other vehicles that have been seen towed from the area, what role they might have played. That's a great example of the kind of stuff we're still looking into. And I think this is one of the challenges early on. There's a lot of information. Sometimes it's all over the place. And then trying to determine, did it really play a factor or not? And there are a lot of claims that are made. There are a lot of witness reports. Part of our job is to really determine what's the factual information here. And just so you know, we won't be just looking at reports. If there was contact or somebody cut somebody off, we're going to be looking for literally paint somewhere to determine whether that really happened or not. That is what takes a while for us to gather, is that factual information.
Just take one more question.
Mark Mester, KRCR News Channel 7. Is it possible to conduct toxicology reports based on how the victims are? The two drivers?
So the question is performing toxicology analysis on the two drivers. And this is another really important and good question because it is standard procedure to collect blood samples and toxicology from the drivers in these circumstances. Yes, there can be sufficient remains for us to obtain that information. So right now, one of the things we're in the process of doing is seeing whether or not those required samples were actually collected. And then we take those samples and send them off to the Civil Aeromedical Institute, CAMI, which is an FAA facility, and they will do the analysis for us and check certain things. That's a requirement. What we got to do now is find out whether that requirement was met and whether we can get the samples needed to make the analysis.
To conduct toxicology reports?
We're trying to find that out right now. Right.
Mr. Rose Payne, I have.
Your call.
I have,
Last question.
I have one, Paige St. John with the Los Angeles Times. To what degree is egress from the motor coach an issue?
So the question is about whether egress could have played a role. And another really great question because we're going to be looking at survival factors. We have other recommendations about occupant protection, which includes not things like seatbelts, but what you're really getting to, and that is when something like this happens, can people get out or not? So what's important about that is it's the full crashworthiness of the bus, but also what are the other elements that are available for protecting those people. If you can't, how do they get out? We'll be analyzing that. And I can refer you to our website that actually has some analysis of previous bus crashes, where we've actually looked at the motion within of what can happen, like with a seatbelt on or off, or in this case, people's ability to get out or not get out because of the position of the vehicle, smoke, fire, etc. So that's absolutely one of the areas we would be looking at.
That is something the motor coach industry has fought the NTSB on?
So the question is that something that the motor coach industry has fought the NTSB on? And I guess what I can say is that we have 7 recommendations that are related to fire safety that are open. We have a whole set of crash-worthy related ones that are also open. And that's to say that we have recommendations that are out there open that have not been closed successfully by folks either manufacturing or in the industry. We are always after people trying to get these closed. And I'm going to finish with this. This is exactly why we push not just to find the probable cause, but issue safety recommendations. The worst thing for the NTSB is to show up, know that we've issued recommendations from a previous accident where lives have been lost, injuries have occurred, and show up and find out if those recommendations have been closed and those things actually enacted, lives could have been saved or people's injuries prevented. Those are exactly the kind of things that we're going to be looking at in this accident. Thank you.